Hi there, I'm Jim, your companion on the journey to emotional healing and reclaiming yourself after unhealthy relationships. If you've ever felt like the one who loved harder, waited longer, and tried more in an unclear relationship, this video is for you. Some relationships don't break us because we're weak, but because we stay too long in a space that's never felt emotionally safe. You gave your all, and in return you got silence, mixed signals, and cold distance. That's when your spirit starts to wear down, and your self-respect quietly begins to erode with every unanswered message. But there comes a moment when the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight harder, it's to walk away, not out of anger, not to manipulate, but with deep clarity. I deserve more than this. Stay until the end of this video. I promise you'll realize that your silence might be the loudest thing they've ever heard. You don't have to over-explain to be understood. Sometimes simply standing up and walking away sends the clearest message of all. If these words resonate with you, hit subscribe and follow. Because here we don't just talk about love, we learn how to love ourselves wisely, deeply, and with unwavering self-respect. There is a kind of silence that isn't about escape, it's a declaration. When someone with an anxious attachment style quietly walks away, it's not surrender. It's awakening after a long journey of giving, waiting, and hoping in vain. It's not weakness. It's the moment they realize, I've gone far enough to know I no longer need to keep enduring this. The anxious partner doesn't leave because they stop loving, they leave because they finally choose to love themselves more. Their heart once bent over backwards, idealizing the avoidant partner, forgiving over and over, wondering, what did I do wrong? Every time the connection went cold. They believed if they were kind enough, patient enough, loving enough, maybe, just maybe, the other person would open up. But love, when placed in someone emotionally unavailable, doesn't become magic, it becomes exhaustion. After countless unanswered messages and deep conversations met with silence, something finally clicks. I'm not asking for too much, they're simply not showing up enough. This withdrawal isn't loud. There's no confrontation, no dramatic ending. Just one day they stop explaining, stop trying, stop begging for love that should have been offered freely. In that silence lives hundreds of unspoken conversations, an inner voice whispering, you're not wrong for wanting clarity. You're not weak for needing consistency. When they step back, they don't leave emptiness. They leave a powerful, wordless message. They were once the first to text, the one to keep the connection warm even if it felt one-sided. But they come to understand, no one should carry the emotional weight of a relationship alone. This stepping back isn't to make someone regret, it's to return to themselves. They begin asking, am I trying to keep this person or losing myself trying to hold on to this relationship? And soon the truth becomes clear. No relationship is worth the price of your self-respect. I share this not to shame the avoidant, but to honor the quiet, powerful shift in those who once gave too much. They don't need drama to end it. They need clarity. And in that clarity, a new chapter begins. One where they no longer seek validation from outside, but rediscover the worth they always had within. And it is precisely when the anxious partner quietly walks away that an invisible shift begins not within them, but within the one who was once pursued. That silence, that stepping back, which might appear like the end, is actually the beginning of a quiet reckoning for the avoidant. Before this moment, the avoidant felt fine in their role of being needed. They maintained emotional distance out of cruelty, but because intimacy made them feel unsteady, out of control. Space was their safety net. In space they could breathe. But when there's no longer anyone on the other side to fill that space, what once felt like safety slowly reveals itself as emptiness. Not a loud kind of loneliness, but a subtle, creeping absence, the absence of small check-ins, of patient eyes, of a hand that always reached out, even when they pulled away. What unsettles them most isn't just losing a persona, it's losing the feeling of being emotionally awaited. The silence of the anxious partner, the one who used to maintain the fragile thread between them, now becomes a mirror reflecting back the avoidant's deepest fear to truly feel what they've spent so long pushing away. For the first time, no one is stepping in to fill the emotional gap they leave behind. They are alone, no, just physically, but emotionally. There's no one asking, "Are you okay?" No one quietly preserving the bond they took for granted. And in that silence, the questions they've avoided begin to echo. Why didn't I hold on when I had the chance? Have I become so used to being desired that I forgot how to appreciate it? Was I playing strong while actually running from my fear of intimacy? What they begin to realize doesn't crash in dramatically, it creeps in slowly through long stretches of quiet that no one interrupts. The gentle reminders of love are gone, the patience has expired, and gradually they understand. What they lost wasn't just a persona, it was the way that person made them feel seen, held, and emotionally present in a way they hadn't yet learned to be for themselves. This is not punishment. It is a natural consequence when someone who once carried the emotional weight for two finally chooses to put it down. And it strikes at the deepest part of the avoidant, the part they've hidden the most, the longing for closeness, masked for so long by fear of not being worthy of it. Quietly, without drama, something begins to shift. They start to realize that the peace they once found suffocating is actually what they needed most. That intimacy they feared begins to feel like something they now miss. But this time the pursuit won't come from the anxious partner. It must come from within, from a choice that grows out of maturity, not desperation. From a place that no longer seeks to fill the void, but to finally learn how to show up fully, intentionally, and without fear. And then, after the silence has stretched long enough, once the avoidant begins to feel a loss that can no longer be dismissed, a transformation begins, but this time, not with them first. It begins with the one who used to be hurt, the one who used to wait, the one who once feared they were too sensitive now walks forward in stillness. The one who once chased connection now learns to sit beside their loneliness and heal it through their own presence. The anxious partner is no longer the one who needs, they become the one who chooses. They no longer need certainty from another person to feel whole. Validation no longer comes through replies, promises, or half-hearted gestures. Now that certainty is sourced from within, the unshakable truth that I am worthy of love that is clear and consistent. If I have to wait for someone to show up, then it's not the kind of love I want anymore. They don't walk away with a closed heart. They walk away with a heart open toward themselves, to new beginnings, to a relationship where they don't have to abandon their emotional needs to be accepted. This is the moment they truly switch roles, from the passive to the empowered, from chasing to choosing, from confusion to clarity. Meanwhile, the avoidant for the first time feels a different kind of emptiness. Not the absence of someone around them, but the absence of someone still emotionally available to them. They might try to re-enter through a casual text, a subtle reaction, but now they are not standing before the same version of the person they once knew. The anxious partner who once waited with open arms has become someone who can now say no. Someone who protects their emotional dignity with silence instead of pleading. There are no more long conversations meant to salvage what's unclear. No more justifying cold behavior. No more maybe they're just busy or they need time. What was once misunderstood is now named for what it is. Absence, disinterest, unavailability. And so, the reversal becomes visible. Once, the avoidant held the power to control closeness, to stay distant, to commit halfway. But now, the anxious partner holds a different kind of power. The power to decide what is allowed to remain in their emotional space. The roles have reversed, but not out of vengeance, out of balance. The anxious no longer has anything to prove. They don't need to explain why they need clarity, because now clarity is simply a standard they hold for their life. And what the avoidant once ran from intimacy, stability presents has now become what they begin to crave. But the anxious partner is no longer standing at that starting point. They've moved on not because they stopped caring, but because they care enough not to accept less than what they deserve. This is not a reversal designed to trade hurt, but a journey in which one person wakes up, rises, and protects their boundaries, and in doing so, forces the other to finally see themselves more clearly than ever before. In that moment, the avoidant's emotional power dissolves not because it was taken from them, but because the anxious partner let it go. When the anxious partner walks away, not with rage, not with dramatic goodbyes, but with quiet decisiveness, something begins to shift, not just externally, but deep within them. Peace begins to take root. No longer holding on, no longer waiting, no longer decoding the moods of someone distant. They begin to live in their first moments of emotional freedom. It doesn't start with forgetting. It starts with coming home to themselves piece by piece. At first, there's emptiness. But soon, that emptiness becomes fertile ground, a sacred space, where they begin reconnecting with who they are beyond the chase. They start asking, what do I need? What do I love? What makes me feel alive without needing to be loved to feel worthy? Questions once drowned out by the need to be chosen now become a compass guiding them back inward. And gradually they rebuild their life not orbiting around someone else, but grounded within their own center. They invest in passions. They reconnect with people who make them feel safe, seen, heard. They begin practicing discipline with their self-respect, not shutting down from pain, but rising with the realization that love isn't earned through effort alone. It arrives when two whole people meet, not when one bends to be accepted. Meanwhile, on the other side, the avoidant partner begins to experience a kind of unease they can't quite name. There's no message coming in, no one is bridging the distance for them anymore. They start to realize, oh, the stability I felt wasn't something I created, it was something the other person held together. Emotions they've long suppressed begin to surface. Regret, confusion, even a longing for the very closeness they once labeled as too much. But this time, they're not facing someone who will contort themselves for connection. The anxious partner is no longer waiting. They've moved onto a life shaped by boundaries, peace, and a new emotional standard that has no room for inconsistency. The silence now isn't strategy. It's an embodiment of self-worth and release. The person who once anxiously sought to be chosen has chosen themselves and is living a life no longer revolving around someone else's emotional limitations. They know now, if someone isn't ready, then that connection holds no value, not because they are unlovable, but because they are no longer willing to sacrifice themselves to stay. And that's what makes the avoidant feel, perhaps for the first time, the weight of true absence. No one is left to fill the void, to wait at the edge, to quietly hold space. Only them and the emotions they never learned to face. This shift in power is not about winning or losing. It's about reclaiming identity, where the once anxious partner is no longer the victim of their own longing, but the architect of a life rooted in healthy love, clear boundaries, and a heart no longer attached to illusions. And from that very emptiness where longing once lived, where the need to be loved once echoed, something essential begins to bloom: self-love. Not the kind that's printed on t-shirts or quoted in captions, but the kind forged in fiery iron through heartbreak. It is what happens when you sit in stillness, touch your wounds, and whisper to yourself, I've been through too much to keep hurting myself. The once anxious partner begins to learn how to love themselves the way they once loved the avoidant, fully, patiently, and sincerely. They start treating themselves like someone worthy of tenderness. They stop calling themselves too sensitive and begin to understand that this sensitivity was never the problem, it was a gift. A gift of depth, emotional perception, and the capacity to connect in ways most people overlook. And for the first time, they stop trying to heal others to feel loved. They start healing themselves because they deserve peace. From here, forgiveness begins to unfold. But not the kind of forgiveness that reopens doors to those who couldn't cherish them. It is forgiveness as emotional liberation, a conscious unhooking of the chains that kept them trapped in a victim loop. Forgiveness is no longer a justification for avoidance. It's an act of compassion toward their own heart. It sounds like, I don't agree with how they treated me, but I refuse to carry that bitterness another day. That story is no longer mine to hold. They forgive not because the other person deserves it, but because they deserve to be free. Free from unanswered feelings. Free from the weight of, why wasn't I enough? Forgiveness becomes the final chapter of a painful narrative, the moment they stop hurting themselves to keep someone else close. This is also the beginning of gentleness towards self. The days they once blamed themselves for loving too quickly or trusting too easily now become sacred reflections. I loved with my whole heart. That was never the mistake. The only shift I needed was learning to love the right people in the right way. The anxious no longer seek someone to fix them. They no longer need a relationship to prove their worth. Because the very act of surviving someone who couldn't love them properly has become the greatest evidence that they are strong, whole, and worthy. From this space, they can now look back at the person who once hurt them not with resentment, but with awareness. You had a chance to see me. I was there, open-hearted and honest. But now I'm here with my heart still open, but protected by my self-respect. They don't need anyone to change in order to feel valid. They validate themselves by the way they walked away and the way they healed. And to anyone still on that journey, I want to say this. Don't fear the heart that once broke, because sometimes in the shattering, you finally meet yourself. Forgiveness isn't weakness. Forgiveness is your declaration that you have grown beyond the wound. And then, after walking through it all, the hurt, the waiting, the unanswered conversations, you realize the greatest victory was never holding on to someone. It was no longer losing yourself to keep them. Real love doesn't begin from the fear of being abandoned. It begins in the moment you no longer need anyone else to validate your worth. When you can look at someone you once loved deeply and smile free from the weight of old hopes. When you can say, I loved honestly, I gave wholeheartedly, and now I choose to love myself with that same devotion. No one walks through avoidant relationships without wounds. But those wounds don't have to become the place you live forever. They can become the ground where you grow. I don't know where you are in your journey. Maybe you've just let go, maybe it still hurts, or maybe you're finally feeling peace again. But I do know this. You're on the right path. Because every step led by self-respect is a step in the right direction. Remember, you don't need anyone to see you to know you are worthy of love. Your presence, your heart, and your feelings were always enough. And if someone couldn't recognize that, that wasn't your failure. That was their limitation.